All right, I say we get started and let's get the most out of finding our leadership voices, ladies. Rachel, as far as introductions go, I can start if you would like. Is there anything in particular you would like to know about everybody?
I would love to know, I can see your names, but sort of where you are in the world and what you're doing if you're working, or what you want to be doing if you're working or not working, just so I have a sense of where everybody is.
Great. So I am Julie Bronstetter. Pronouns are she, her. I am in Chicago. And I am currently starting, I would say I soft launched an independent coaching business in January, and the hope is to have a hard launch in July. I'm a former HR executive.
Great.
And let's do Ashley next.
Hi, I'm Ashley Stevens. I'm based in New York City, but I'm obviously not there right now. I'm lucky to be house sitting in Connecticut for some relatives. So I am a marketing and events director. I'm coming up on a year not working. So that's been a challenge just because of the events industry. But I'm seeing some signs of life, and I feel like I'm having good conversations, but I'm eager to get working again.
Okay, great. And where are you in Connecticut?
I'm in Madison, but yeah, it's like kind of.
I lived in Orange. So usually when someone says a state, I've likely lived there. So.
Okay. Yeah, it's very nice. I've been coming here, in summer since I was little. So it's nice to have the time. I mean, it's one of the perks of COVID to be able to spend, time different places.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. How about Elizabeth next?
Know Rachel a little bit from our initial connections, but Elizabeth, based in Minneapolis, sales leader, not currently working, but looking to break into the femtech space, and super excited to be here tonight.
Nice to see you.
You too.
Awesome. How about Nicole?
Sure. Hi. So I split my time between Park Slope, Brooklyn, and Asbury Park, New Jersey. I'm in Asbury Park right now. I've been here for most of the pandemic. I'm out of work for 2 years. It's been a long 2 years of job searching, a little rough. I'm a creative director. I have been able to do a little freelance pharmaceutical writing, which I absolutely despise, but at least I'm trying to make some money.
We love the honesty.
Yeah, but yeah, I was in advertising for many years, and then my last job that I was laid off from, I was the creative director in-house for a nonprofit. So I'm kind of looking in both worlds.
How about, Leanne is in Portland. Leanne, do you want me just to read off? Oh, taking this call on the treadmill. Yes. So most likely listen only. Good job.
Was that an option for me? I didn't know that was an option.
Way to multitask, Leanne. Former talent acquisition exec and starting own consulting business. So welcome, Leanne. And I hope you're getting a good walk and sweat on.
And just, could you ask Leanne, in what area will she be consulting? Talent acquisition as well?
I would assume.
Okay, she'll get back to you when she finishes her next
Talent
month.
Acquisition and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Got it. Okay, great.
And Yvonne just joined. Yvonne, we're just doing quick introductions, name, location, and just a little bit about your career situation.
Hi there. How are you?
Hi, Yvonne.
Hi. So my background is an HR business partner, and I'm in the Sacramento, California area. And so my last day was October 30th. And so been with the company for 14 years. Our parent company, Allstate, phased us out, and decided to take a little break for a couple months, and my vacation is now over. So I am looking for a direct hire, or, either in the Sacramento, Roseville area or remote.
Okay.
I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you.
I think that is everyone, Rachel, and I will continue just to admit as people come in.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, everybody. It's great to see Elizabeth again and Julie, and to meet the rest of you. I'll tell you a little bit about myself as we get into it. And because it's obviously small and I do this quite a bit, we can be as interactive as possible. Feel free to interrupt me. You won't You won't throw me off my rhythm. So how come it's already not advancing? There we go. So who am I and what am I doing here? So I play a lot of different roles. And the reason that I start with this slide is because I'm sure, like most of you, there's not just one thing that you do. So in my personal life, I'm married for 30 years. I have 2 kids who are adults, very large extended family. So have a whole other personal life. And for my professional life, I focused on business building and marketing strategy, primarily in the world of women's health, women's wellness, and sexual and reproductive health. I'm a podcast host, which I'm just launching this month, called Business of the V, which is about the intersection of patient care and unmet needs, and the businesses being created to resolve them. My co-host is a practicing obstetrician, gynecologist, surgeon, author, speaker. And I really do love focusing in terms of the work that I do, not only on women's health, but on top line growth for women's health. How do you solve problems? How do you drive top line growth? How do you get people to buy what you're selling? Through this program, as well as many others. And because the majority of people in women's health tend to be people who identify as female, I spend lots of time mentoring and speaking to female entrepreneurs, and always feel that I learn as much as I hopefully provide. I wrote a book a couple of years ago. I do a lot of public speaking, and I'm a vagipreneur, which is just a term that someone else came up with that they let me copyright it to describe a person in the business of female sexual and reproductive health. So this is the boring stuff, but I've done work for large and small companies. On the left-hand side are some of the large organizations I've worked with. I've worked with almost every pharmaceutical company, health and beauty, consumer products. Lots of the companies you see on the left have multiple divisions, and that's one of the pieces of relationship building that I've been lucky enough to create. My first job after business school was at Johnson & Johnson, and the reason I mention that is because the people at J&J and the people who left J&J for 20 years have been the core of my business in terms of relationships. And every year I look, and my top 3 clients, whoever they are, wherever they're from, some way can be traced back to J&J. So to me, the biggest victory is when someone hires me for the 3rd time and I've known them, for 15 years. On the right-hand side, I spend a lot of time, as I said, in women's health, sexual and reproductive health. I'm happy to talk more about that. And so really, this is what I do. I work in growing businesses across the stage of women's lives. So menstruation through menopause, and all the stuff that's in between, fertility, infertility, disease prevention, trying to get pregnant, trying not to get pregnant, incontinence, menopause, hot flashes, solutions for menstruation, new distribution models, anything around the very broad range of reproductive and sexual health across the range of a woman's life. And sometimes she's doing multiple things at once. And in certain cases, it's a period of time that she's going through. So that's really where I spend my time, both with companies large and small, again, focused on top line growth. And I also spend a lot of time in the in-between, connecting venture-backed companies to corporate strategic partners. So I've done a lot of strategy work for the larger companies, and what are the gaps they've identified in women's health, and am I meeting and learning from companies that might provide solutions in that space. So that's sort of how I spend my day. I use this shouting from the rooftops. I've been speaking about sexual health for a long time. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Orgasmic Leadership, in which I interviewed 36 academics, entrepreneurs, and healthcare practitioners, really about how people are taking advantage of existing business trends to drive growth in their companies. And one of the things in women's health, there are a couple of big issues in women's health, which will probably come up, and I'll provide a pretty specific example, is in addition to challenges with access to money, which everybody knows, that's sort of an old story. There are some particular idiosyncrasies in women's sexual and reproductive health, like, if you mention a vagina, people blush, it doesn't matter where you are. So there's that issue. And then there's also access to media channels, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but it's part of what I like about it. I think the people who stay in it are, some of the most creative people I've met during quarantine. I did a short Zoom series, just figuring we're not getting together. It's a very collaborative group. Why don't I speak to people who I think are really creative and great problem solvers to figure out what they're doing to survive and thrive in COVID? So I wound up doing 120, which really passed a lot of time in COVID. I thought I'd do, maybe a dozen. And that's what spun into the podcast. But it's really a desire to continue to learn in the space, continue to make connections between companies, and to keep the conversation going, because a lot of the work that I do is around creating a vocabulary. So there's actually a discussion to be had. If you look at what's going on in the world right now, it looks like women's health is everywhere. We joke that it's an overnight sensation, centuries in the making. So, now sex is big and people are buying sex toys, and there's all kinds of stories about how these businesses are growing. One of the benefits of COVID. So there's just a lot of discussion, and there's always stuff happening. Switching to leadership, which is the focus of the conversation, I just want to give you a little bit of overview. Google leadership, you'll see last time I did it, 143 million entries. There are so many different, like the 100 best books to read, the 10 best skills to have, the 7 most influential people, the 5 skills you must know how to have. So there's lots of stuff written and talked about leadership. There are many, many different models that approach it from a variety of different perspectives, whether it's your attitude or your actions or skills or particular constructs or models. The reason I lay this out is because, as you'll see from mine as well, none of these are brain surgery. They're logical ways of putting together thoughts and processes that have worked for at least some group of people. There's a lot of discussion on leadership. Can you teach it? Is it inborn? Can you learn it in the classrooms? You have to be, on the ground to learn it. And that's a conversation that just goes on all the time. Is it about leadership in your personal life or your professional life? Are those the same skills? Are those the same things? Are you basically different versions of yourself in all your environments? Okay. Why? Okay. And then, so there's so many different ways to talk about leadership. Again, these are just some of the many characteristics you hear people talk about. Leaders are empathic. They have a strong work ethic. They might be the smartest people in the room. They might know where the smartest people in the room are. It's about motivating other people. It's about continuous improvement. So again, you can really get lost in sort of the volume, the depth and breadth of all these discussions about leadership. And I lead into it this way because the way I approach this leadership voice is very simple. And I like people to take away, 1 or 2 things that they can do that will really influence how they interact in the world, in their professional life. So the topic is finding your leadership voice. So I'll start with what it is. It's a lot of different things, but it's how you command a situation, how you enter a room, how you get people to listen. What is it that you bring that attracts people? And now how do you command a Zoom is, should be how do you enter a room? How do you command a Zoom? So it's really, how do you show up? And there are lots of people who talk about that in the context, well, now clothing is a totally different conversation, but what you wear and the color of your hair and how you do your hair. And now all those conversations, thank goodness, are exploding. But it's really, what is the impression you want to make when you're interacting with people? And in my experience, there are a bunch of reasons you might need one. And some of you are probably working on this right now, which is you are your brand. You need to be able to present and sell your experience. You need to interview. You're often the spokesperson for your project, your business, or your career. You need to be heard within an organization. You need to be heard to get into an organization. So I think of this as a very important tool that you need to progress, to succeed, to work, to enjoy. Whether or not your objective is to be the CEO of a company or a startup, at some point you will be selling. And, I don't mean this to sound crass, but you'll be selling yourself in some way. So you'll be selling your idea so you get the money. You'll be selling your experience so you get the promotion. You'll be selling your experience external so that when the world opens up, you will be the first person they call to get a job in industries that are hopefully coming back to life. So I'm curious. Oh, I don't have everybody on video, so I'll just see for the few people who are on video. But is this, I just show of hands, is this something you've ever thought about before? Yes, I've thought about it. You know, usually I get just about that. Yeah, sort of, maybe, yes. Once I did last week. Yeah, I had one, I lost it. But the overarching theme for me is you spend a lot of time working on your skill development, you know, whether it's, you know, Yvonne as an HR business partner, understanding what new options are available, or let me see who else I have, or Nicole as a creative director. There are fundamental skills you need to do your jobs. And I would argue that this is one of those areas where you need to spend just as much time figuring out how to show up. And I know we have a few New Yorkers here, and Hamilton's all over the world, but the analogy we always use is you want to be in the room where it happens. And by having a leadership voice, you will increase your chances of being in the room, whether it's proverbial or literal. It keeps freezing. That's weird. So I wanted to just give an example of where I learned this. You know, I said all these models, people have been using them, and some you figure out as you go. Just wanted to share an experience that I had, which sort of crystallized for me how I developed a leadership voice, and then unravel the steps that I took and that I watched other people take, you know, on this journey to find one that I've seen work for lots of other people. So several years ago, we were approached by a company that had a product that improved arousal, desire, and satisfaction for women. And when I say it was the perfect storm, you know, having worked in almost every consumer products category you can think of, in pharma, and working on women's businesses from the tops of their heads to the tips of their toes, when we found this asset that improved arousal, desire, and satisfaction, was clinically proven, was one of the few available. There had been 53 active clinical programs. At the time we saw this product, there were 2. There was really no language to talk about it. At the time that you would search for it, you would have 2 extremes, you know, porn, and I always say, which is fine among consenting adults. It's not necessarily a replacement for sex education, but that's one extreme with all the issues and pluses and minuses that has. And on the other end was disease. Like, what do I do if my vagina turns purple? And there was very little in the middle about how to have a conversation. And part of it is a lack of vocabulary. And part of it obviously is a lack of education, or, you know, bad education, and we'll talk about a lot of these things in different cultures. And, you know, America's certainly a melting pot. And when you come from different parts of the world with different ethnicities, and different backgrounds, and different places on the gender spectrum, there's so many differences that even if we did have good education, there would be hard to find one way that fit all these different needs. So here we have this for marketers, this is like red meat. You know, you find a category where there's huge demand, and all you ever want in marketing, all I've ever wanted in marketing, is to work in a category that's emotionally engaging. You know, it's way more difficult to make selling toothbrushes, which we've done, and foot fungus and hemorrhoids, you know, emotionally engaging hemorrhoid cream, than it is sex, which is incredibly emotional and visceral and complicated. So we were so excited. My business partner, I've had the same business partner for 20 years, and we literally said, okay, we've been doing strategy consulting. We can grow stuff. Let's try this. We had never raised money. We went out to Silicon Valley to raise venture capital. And I was the person at the school. I don't know how you guys are. I don't like to ask people for money. Like, I don't want to say, can you spend 25 cents on a bake sale? But I do like going into VCs and saying, can you give me millions of dollars to think about this category and grow it? So I don't know, maybe I should. It just was something, one of the things that I see a lot, especially with women, is this, you know, the negotiation part really isn't fun. And for some reason, I find it like an aerobic activity and my endorphins get going. So Mary and I head to Silicon Valley. I had gone to Stanford Business School. So a lot of the people in and around these funds that we were going to, I knew from business school. Some of them were running divisions, but, you know, so I was in some ways a known entity. We traveled in some of the same circles. However, here we were, what they considered first-time entrepreneurs. because we had never raised money before. We had run a successful consulting business for decades, but we had never raised money before. We were two women and we were talking about vaginas and orgasms and, you know, any other thing that you can think of that they don't like to think about. And we had 13 meetings in 2 days. And the objective in a venture capital meeting or in a financial meeting is to get someone sufficiently interested that they want to have a next meeting. So long story short, every fund thinks they have a different investment thesis, but when you're the entrepreneur, it just looks like a blur of, you know, file cabinets move from place to place. Mostly middle-aged white men. I was a middle-aged white woman. I'm still a middle-aged white woman, but now I'm more middle-aged. And we go into the first meeting and they ask us how our product is different than Viagra. And our product was topically applied to the outer lips of the vagina. No drug-drug interactions, no hormones, no glycerin, no paraben. And it worked by increasing the sensitivity of the nerve endings. So, and I could talk about that for hours, but the question was, okay, Rachel, Mary, how is this different than Viagra? And so we gave an explanation about the difference in terms of how the male sexual response is, you know, the male genitals respond like a hydraulic pump. You pump the blood in, which is basically what Viagra does. It's a vasodilator that increases blood flow. You know, and if that pumps up, the system's working and everybody's good to go. But compared to that, women were much more complicated. It involved, in this female sexual response involves an intersecting set of psychological, social, emotional, contextual, physiological elements. So besides that, our responses are biologically much more complicated. You know, it really isn't a good analogy because Viagra is sort of, you flip a switch and that's not what happens with women. And I'm preaching to the choir, to anyone who's ever known a woman, identifies as a woman, or has explored their sexuality in any way. It's not, you know, it's just not the same. So they were totally bored. And, you know, we thought the worst thing that could happen is that they wouldn't ask any questions, that they would be silent. And it turns out the worst is that they're laughing. You know, so they're, oh my God, let me tell you about my senior prom date. Oh, and my ex-girlfriend, when she jumped on the table and, you know, she swung from a chandelier. And we're literally in business meetings. Okay. And it was absurd. You know, I'm in my mid 40s, and when this happened, my business partner's in her mid to late 50s. Like, this is not our first business meeting. And we certainly knew enough to know that, you know, this wasn't appropriate. Okay, meeting 2, we go in and they say, we've seen your survey that shows that there's an increase in satisfaction. What does it mean for him? We gave our answer about how well designed the study was and what it showed, and that we believe that anecdotally, if he showed increased satisfaction, the study was done between heterosexual couples in long-term relationships, that if he showed increased satisfaction, it was likely a result of feeling either like a more able partner or being happier that his partner was more satisfied. But from a physiological standpoint, the way that it penetrated the vaginal tissue was very different on a woman than it was the penile tissue of the man. So blah, blah, blah. We could go on about this stuff forever. Same thing, the whispering, the prom dates. And at one point, you know, we're thinking, I feel like I'm in a 7th grade locker room. And then I realized that was insulting because I knew 7th graders who were a lot more mature. So we leave there with no money. I'm getting to the end, I promise. So Mary and I said, we have 11 more of these. We're not going to leave here with a nickel. You know, we had these fantasies if you get one of those big checks like this, you know, gigantic checks the size of a door, you know, with millions of dollars written to you, you know, have at it. And we said to ourselves and to each other, we're not going to leave here with any money. Like, this just is not going well. We can't even get them to ask us the important strategic questions, of which there are many. How are you going to grow? Who are your customers? What are potential exits? What's your distribution strategy? What is your messaging? 1,000 questions. We didn't get any of them. So Mary and I are sitting there and something makes me look in my wallet and I have a $100 bill, which is only, it's not interesting, but only meaningful because I put everything on a credit card because I'm so compulsive and I like to track everything. So we decided it was like divine intervention or dumb luck that there was a $100 bill in my wallet. And so it gives us an idea and we're whispering and we're plotting a strategy and we say, okay, we got it. Let's try it. We have 11 more. Can't go worse than the first 2. At the rate we're going, we're leaving with no money. I'm not getting on the plane without at least some commitment to have somebody meet again in the days when you could travel. And And so we go in with this new strategy. We walk in, have the $100 bill, and I put it on the table. I said, here's a $100 bill. If anyone asks me a question about the category that I can't answer, this $100 is yours. If anyone makes a sexual innuendo that we haven't heard before, this $100 is yours. If anyone shares a double entendre that makes us blush or anything that makes us uncomfortable, this $100 is yours. And then I paused and I said, she likes it more, she wants to have it more. Let's talk about the business model. And then there was silence, but it was the good kind of silence because I had their attention. Because in that moment, what we did is we said, we're serious people talking about serious opportunity for you to make serious money. If you want to giggle, if you want to be embarrassed, have at it. We're not going to be embarrassed. Bring it on. We'll take what you give us. And that's, you know, when I sat down to write the book years later, that's the moment that I feel like I found my leadership voice. And it changed how we talked about the business going forward. It changed how I presented myself. It changed how I met with investors. Not that I became a different person, but it helped me realize the power of taking control of a situation as opposed to waiting for people to stop whispering before you can show them your cap table. And I look back and say, that's also, you know, what I call orgasmic leadership. So that was me. And I looked at that and I spoke to a lot of people and I had read tons of business books and I was always an observer of what people do. And so I started to say, you know, let me step back and see what I've learned, you know, what other people have taught me, what are some of the other models? And there were three fundamental themes that I came away with of the implications and the importance of, I'm like pressing and it's not working. Okay. So the first thing, and I said this before, is preparation matters. This is not something most people innately have. It's like, you don't know how to, you know, necessarily code unless you learn some of the rules of coding. You don't necessarily know how to do financial analysis unless you learn or taught or read about financial analysis. It requires some preparation. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that preparation is and how it increases your effectiveness. The second thing is that the context matters. Who you're talking to, where you're talking to them, about what you're talking, the situation that you find yourself in emotionally, professionally, personally, financially, all of that has an impact on how you show up. And then last but not least is your career matters. You know, certainly everybody on the phone is working or wants to be working. And it's a way to, so if I were to step away with three things, prepare, understand the context, and know that this is something you need to do to take your career wherever it is you're planning to try to take it. Okay, so here's the easy part. There are 3 steps. First step, identify people you admire. They could be people you know, they could be people on TV, they could be celebrities. You know, in my case, they're often characters in a show or in a movie. Figure out what about them grabs your attention. And because of the world we live in, you have lots of access to read what they've written, to see what they say, to watch their body language. So the first piece is to spend some time figuring out when you have a positive reaction, when you see a person or you walk into a room and see this person or watch this character in a movie, and it has that kind of effect where you sit up and listen, what is it about them that is causing that? So that's step 1. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Clear so far? Pretty straightforward. As I said, not brain surgery. The second is determine your strengths. And the reason I say this is it's a generalization, but I tend to find that women are way better at listing all the things that they don't do well or they don't like about themselves. And in this exercise, it's very important to understand not only what it is you do well, but what you like to do. And it's the intersection of those 2 things that you really need to understand. A list of all the things you're not good at, or all the things you don't like about yourself, or all the skills you don't have is, to me, you know, just an exercise in futility. We'll come back to that as well. And then the last one, which is so obvious and is, to me, and is usually the one that doesn't happen, is practice. You know, I use the example, I don't know how many sports fans, is anybody a sports fan? Like no one's going onto the field for the Super Bowl or on the balance beam at the Olympics without practicing. You would never go into a situation where the stakes are high without practicing. And so one of the things that I always surprised by and find enjoyable about doing this exercise is how few people do this and how clear it is, how easy it is to do. And so when I say test your voice practice, we'll talk about some of the situations you can do that in where it's low risk. And I don't mean practice when you go onto a presentation stage in front of 300 people. And I don't mean when you're going in for an interview for a job you want. I mean practicing, way before that. So 3 things. If you take away nothing, identify people you admire, figure out what you like about them, determine your strengths, and practice. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through each one and hopefully spend most of the time on questions. So for me, all roads lead to Oprah and my dad, but no one knew my dad on the phone except me. And the first article that I wrote that got traction and where I came up with this was how to find your leadership voice because Oprah's is already taken. Obsessed. Happy to talk about that later. And I was way obsessed before the Meghan and Harry interview. So when I look at her and I say, what am I obsessed about? And I break it down and I ask you to do this when you're trying to find your leadership voice. What do I like about her? And the ultimate thing that I think is amazing about what she does is she really knows how to integrate context and content. She can be just as believable starting a school in South Africa to teach girls about leadership as she can going around the world on a cruise ship of one of her billionaire friends, or John Travolta's birthday party, or even more personal, sitting on the couch with someone who's sharing some traumatic experience that they've never talked about before and sharing it. They think they're sharing with Oprah and they know that there are other people listening, but she engages them so completely. And when I looked at that and I said, what is that? It is really understanding which Oprah has to show up. And it doesn't mean she's a different person. There are things about her that are consistent no matter what she does. She's always prepared. She always has a sense of humor. She knows when to be serious. She knows when to wait for the pauses. And so when I started doing this, I said, well, that's what I want to do. And I'm not suggesting I'm anywhere close. I'm saying when you do this exercise, figure out why you like the person you like. It's easy to say, I like Oprah. She can sell a lot of stuff. She's a self-made billionaire. She doesn't take crap from anybody. But from a leadership perspective, you spend some time breaking it down. So I had mentioned this before, but you can find your person, anywhere. They could be in your family. You could work with them. They could be public figures. They could be inspiring stories. The number of times I've sung that Rocky theme running up a flight of stairs. There are people in history. Find the people who have grabbed you. And it shouldn't be that hard to find once you start thinking about it, because people do. I always find that when we do this exercise and we have like a half a day to do a workshop, that people always have someone in mind that they like, but they weren't quite sure what it is that was magnetic about them. So I'm curious, and you don't have to feel like you're being called. Is there anybody on the Zoom who has a person like that, whether it's a character in a movie or it's a person in their family, who just you look and say, I want some of that. How do I do that?
Brene Brown on my list. Like when I was younger, but Brene Brown is somebody I think love to connect.
And what is it about her? I'm having a lot of trouble hearing Elizabeth. I don't know if everybody else is.
Yeah, I am as well.
Okay,
But it sounded like you said open and honesty. I assume you're going to say vulnerability. I'm also a huge Brene Brown fan.
Me too.
Can you hear now?
Yes, now we can.
Yes.
That's great.
All right. AirPods struggle sometimes. With Brene Brown, there's just this openness, and I think it just pulls people in around, and they open up in that situation with that person in such an authentic and honest way.
And in the 2 examples, in Oprah and Brene Brown, oh, by the way, they're able to translate those skills into a huge brand and a huge business.
Yes.
Other thoughts? that you're ready to share on the spot? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So the first thing I would ask you to do, if this is something you decide you want to pursue and spend some time in, is find your people. Find your people, watch them, talk to them if they're alive, if you have access to them. I never got to speak to Oprah. The closest I got was doing an interview with somebody else on Oprah Radio. Observe them, read what they write, see what they've written, see how they interact, look at pictures. So find your people. I would say, you know, if you have one, great. If you have three, great. Much more than that, and it becomes just an exercise you'll be spinning your wheels in. Curious if anyone has any questions at this point. Because in the end, this is supposed to be an exercise that you can then take away and find some value from. Okay, I'm looking at a lot of unmoving faces, but that's okay. I will move ahead. So again, this takes work and it takes some time. So identify the people. Then the next thing I said was identify your strengths. I talked about why I focused on that, but step back for a minute and say, how do you want people to describe you? How do you want people to feel when you walk in the room? What are your most compelling qualities? What do you feel the most confident when you're doing? Who do you want to emulate? What kind of energy do you want to communicate? Sort of what makes you unique when you walk into a room? Okay. I'm not going to cold call anybody, but if anybody has a characteristic that they would like to share that they think makes them unique, now would be the time to do it. Julie?
Oh, you saw me unmute. I'm on here. Yes, I will happily participate. I get a lot, and one of the main reasons why I am becoming a coach is the energy that I bring to a room, to a one-on-one conversation. That's something that I constantly hear back, is that my energy is infectious. So that is definitely one of my unique qualities that I want to weave into, and that I am weaving into my personal brand.
So that's another great way to ask the question. How do people describe you in the positive ways? You know, not the cousin who hates you, or, you know, the woman you stole her boyfriend or girlfriend, but the people who you feel get you. How do they describe you? I'd love some head nods. Is this making sense? Does this sound straightforward? Okay.
Can I ask a question though, Rachel, that
Please
might
do.
be looming for others? Because I know you said, you know, most women will go to the negatives on what people don't like about me, what I don't like about myself. And so how do you combat that when, you know, when you had those two meetings that were so defeating, and you got that idea for the $100 bill? Like, how do you combat those negative thoughts that we all have? And as women, we probably have them more often.
So for me personally, I'm very competitive, and I looked at it as like a tennis match that I was going to win. So that is what gave me the energy to think about it in a different way. So the idea of winning, whatever it is, it doesn't mean I have to beat someone, but my objective when I landed was to leave there with money. And I was going to be damn sure that I wasn't going to leave without at least a couple of meetings. So for me, that's what helped. Years later, when I saw Brene Brown Daring Greatly, or Dare to Lead, she said something that I think has been so helpful to me in the past 2 years. She says, if you don't feel scared or nervous or uncomfortable, you're not trying hard enough. And what I found so compelling about that is I get that feeling in my stomach. Everybody does. You don't walk into every situation and feel confident. But now when I have that feeling, I change the tape in my head and I say, oh, I'm obviously doing something right. I'm really uncomfortable. So the example, Liz, I apologize if you heard this before, a bunch of young entrepreneurs in the space, I'm one of the gray hairs in sexual health, were plotting a rally in New York to protest Facebook's policies, which have been very discriminatory towards women's health businesses and body parts for a long time. And I literally am like, I've never been to a rally. What am I doing at a rally? What do you wear to a rally? And I'm driving in the car with this feeling in my stomach. And I just keep saying, okay, you're doing the right thing because you don't feel comfortable. And we get there. And the first sort of chant that everybody is giving, and we're doing it around the corner from Facebook downtown in New York City, is, hey ho, Facebook's policies must go. Like, okay, I can say that. I'm going to join in and chime in. And the next one was led by people much younger than I, for whom, their sexuality is potentially more a part of their businesses than mine is. I really approach this from the capitalist perspective and understanding the industry and being able to talk the language of partnership and business. There's never a part of that where I'm talking about my personal life, certainly my personal sexual life. So the next chant was, if you want to fuck us, if you want to fuck us, stand the fuck up for us. And I'm like, nope, not doing that. I feel uncomfortable. I'm just not doing that. I never want there to be a scenario where my kids seeing me on TV saying, if you want to fuck us, stand the fuck up for us. Totally respected that they were doing it and that was how they were showing up. But you also have to know what your limitations are. And my advice is push through. Don't let the fear stop you, because the answer is always no if you don't ask the question. So there is no great answer, Julie. You have to figure out what is going to get you to stand up and walk in that door again. Or, you fall down on the mat. My father, we watched every sports movie under the sun. So we speak in sports analogies in my family. Or when you're, boxing and you're knocked down to the ground, what's going to happen? Not just when you get up, will you get up, but what are you going to do when you get up? So the other piece that I find helpful, that I learned from my business partner over the years, is don't try to predict what their reaction will necessarily be and then run all these scenarios in your head. Give them the chance, understand that the person in the room also is processing stuff. Now, if there's an investor and you're the entrepreneur, there are 1,000 different situations and you're not always the one in charge. But it is a dialogue and it is an interaction and it's not going to go perfectly. And if there's one thing I would say is don't let failure stop you. You hear all this stuff about failure's great. I don't invest in people who don't fail. Okay, I've failed 1,000,000 times. It does not feel great. It feels for me like a punch in the stomach. I don't like it. If I never did it again, I would be happy. But I know it's part of a life and a career and a business. So if you start with the fact that something is going to go wrong, but that you're going to teach yourself the skills to come back, that's really way more important. Not any single event defines you. Did I answer your question?
No, you totally did. And I love that you're reinforcing this idea that the feeling of confidence can be unsettling. This idea of like, when you are uncomfortable, push forward and you're doing the right thing. So
And you just used an example about being confident. Here's a perfect example. I have a friend who is a life coach and became an artist. And she would walk around and say, she's an artist. And I was in business and I said, I wrote a book. And she said, you didn't write a book, you're an author. Stop saying you wrote a book and start saying you're an author. And it's just a totally different belief. It's a totally different message. So we can spend hours talking about the negative talk and the destructive talk and how we're not always our best advocates. And I do think it's a skill that you learn over time and each day you get better. I'm not suggesting, given that I'm older than everybody on the phone, that I figured it out. But what I will say is, with experience and with failure, I am confident in my ability to continue, even when I fail. And then the last thing is, oh, sorry, this is one I always talk about. We all know these stereotypes. A man's assertive, a woman's aggressive. He's leader-like, she's bossy. My feeling about this, and the reason I talk about it is because it comes up so much in the context of discussions about women with leadership, is I just separate myself from this. I'm assuming people are describing me, characterizing me, branding me, labeling me, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm really not going to waste any time on this. Now, for me personally, I will say I've never seen anything good come from drinking too much at a party, a professional party, and dancing on the bar. So that would just be like behavior that I would say. I've never seen anything good come from that. But, you know, the aggressive bossy girl could also be the one who kicks everybody's behind in terms of the sales goal. You know, one of the challenges is, and I say this, and I have a very good friend who I've gone to college with in business school, and we've had this conversation where when we first started working, you put your head down, you worked harder than anybody else, and you would get promoted. And I think anyone who's been in a professional workplace for more than 25 minutes would say, there's so much more than that. Because oftentimes you're doing the work, you are completing the tasks, you're checking the boxes, and you might not be getting the opportunities that you want. So when I talk about this, people will categorize you, you decide how you want to present yourself, but don't spend any time if, you know, she's the office flirt, or, you know, again, I think life of the party is always dangerous. I used to tell my kids, like, teachers never love the class clown. I get that your friends like that. That's never the great thing to be when you're in a classroom. But spend some time thinking about this in the context of your strengths, and really don't spend any time about how people are labeling you, because there's nothing you can do about it. You know, you're not going to run a campaign to say, no, I'm really not aggressive. I'm really passive. You know, I'm really not bossy. It's just, I think you're an idiot. You know, and there's no solution for this. There's no action to take, which is why I think it's not worth investing a lot of time. And the last one is practice and don't take chances. So what do I mean? You're practicing for an interview. Write down your answers, look in the mirror, tape yourself, meet a friend for coffee, ask your sister. Practice the words coming out of your mouth and how you stand and how you feel, so that by the time you get there, it's something you know. And if nerves overtake you, you know, there's some muscle memory that comes back. So I want to give you an example. So my sister-in-law is a dermatologist, and sometimes she likes to test things out on me because I'm her sister. And literally she was teaching a technician how to do something on me. And I said, this totally reminds me of what I tell people is to practice in low risk situations. No matter what this technician does to me, I'm not going to complain. I'm there to support the family. So when you think about low risk situations, you know, I also like to have a sense of humor about it, but find places you're comfortable. Maybe it's your mentor through this program. Maybe it's someone at work. Maybe it's someone in a different industry, or maybe it's just, you know, FaceTiming and taping yourself. Never, 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 never go into a situation that has huge consequences unprepared. So key takeaways: commit to a process, monitor how you're doing, have someone help you, and then continue to do the process again. This is not one and done. This is not something I said, oh, well, here's my leadership voice. I'm done. I'll just bring $100 bills wherever I go. It's a constant process. And the same way, I'm sure many of you, especially people who have been out of work, have been trying to expand your horizons and learn new skills and figure out how to hone the skills you have. Think of this as a skill that should always be on your list and something that you should be thinking about. Questions? I'm hoping the silence is because you're so overwhelmed with the content that you're absorbing it all, and not that anybody has fallen asleep.
Hey, this is Leanne. I'm not going to be on video because, I just got off the treadmill. But
I totally respect that double tasking.
I totally have a question for you around the label comments and section, because I feel like sometimes there's a balance between how you're labeled and how someone's giving you feedback.
Okay,
So-
talk a little more.
So if someone's giving you feedback saying, hey, you're coming off really aggressive in this situation or in this meeting, it makes you appear to be really bossy. And it's feedback around how we're showing up. So how would you balance the approach of like, how do you dismiss the labeling when it's truly the feedback that you're getting?
Well, part of it is because it's so subjective that you probably were described as bossy because you are a woman doing it. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
So can you temper it? Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that by the time you were done tempering it, you wouldn't even feel like yourself. Can you dial it back? Yeah, absolutely. Experiment with that next time. Practice with a friend. See how that response or that presentation would have gone if you dial it back 10%. But there's nothing you can do about those kinds of assumptions, which in my mind are 100% related to gender.
Agreed.
So I have this friend who's a senior guy at an investment bank, and I'm sort of like his woman professional friend. So when something happens at work around women, he comes and tells me the story. So he says, you're never going to believe this. I was in a meeting, and this woman that I've told you about, who's senior, and she drives everybody crazy, she smacks her hands on the table and yells, everybody listen to me. And he says, what do you think? Isn't that unprofessional? Shouldn't I fire her? I said, I don't know I said, listen, I'm 100% sure she was interrupted 20 times before she lost her shit and behaved in what, is not a mature professional way. What I would have done is I would have said, okay, I would have literally, when he asked me what I would do, my first reaction was, I said, I'm going to climb up on the table and say, hello, can I get everyone's attention? And just sort of like take some of the air out of the room. And that might have not worked. And they might have said, you're an idiot. And my skirt might have been too short. But you have to figure out how to do it in a way that isn't angry, because angry never works.
Right.
Bossy sometimes works. Angry never works.
Thank you.
And I know we have an hour and people have lots of stuff to do. So this is, if you have any interest in talking more, you want to reach me, here's where I am. I'm in these places all the time. I would love it. We're launching the podcast next week. If you would subscribe to the podcast, that would make me very, very happy. But if anyone wants to follow up or talk about their personal situations, or if there's any way that I could be helpful, please feel free to reach out.
Rachel, I have a question. I don't know if there's time. Well, first of all, I wanted to know if you got the money.
I did. We raised $20 million.
Awesome. But second of all, I wondered if you sort of alter your leadership voice according to the situation. Do you maybe pick a couple of different voices that fit with you and then emphasize one for, each different pitch, et cetera?
Yeah. It's a good question. So what I go back to is my observation of Oprah. There's always a sameness to her, her presence. And I hate the word authenticity, but she happens to be very authentic. So the places I'll change is, I use humor a lot. There's places that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I'm never self-deprecating. It doesn't matter where I am. When it's a team, and all that kind of stuff, you can use that in a humorous way. And I've listened to every Brene Brown thing. And I do think this balance between vulnerability and behavior is very important. I would say you maybe push different levers and you have things at different volume, but I'm not sure people know how to be different.
Yeah.
All the time. So if there's a situation where you're concerned that, there's going to be a really negative reaction to just the virtue of you being a woman or the topic that you're talking about, or for many of you, you walk in and you're young and people don't take you seriously. There's a lot of things you can't control. I would figure out what are the most important characteristics that will make you credible and believable. So I would say it's a bit of, lowering or raising the volume on particular ones as opposed to being a different person in each one.
Right, that makes sense.
Like I'll give the Oprah example when Tom Cruise, when, she's talking to John Travolta or Tom Cruise, she's laughing and jumping. When she's talking to someone who's experienced trauma, she's not doing that, but she's still listening with the same amount of intensity.
Right.
Did anyone watch the interview on Sunday with which I'm totally obsessed?
Yes.
My mother said, wasn't that a great interview? And I'm like, well, listen, you have every hot topic. You have royalty, you have money, you have family dysfunction, you have racism, you have pregnancy, you have mental health. Like, I don't think it was that hard an interview to do. But what she did that was so amazing that I thought was how many times she just let the silence fall. And she doesn't do that in every interview. She does listen attentively for cues all the time in every interview. And that was an example of her listening for the cue in a different way and understanding that there had to be some space there. Ashley, did I answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. That was helpful.
So that's it. Three
Thank you
things,
so
pretty
much,
easy to do.
Rachel.
Identify your people, identify your strengths, and practice. And keep a log, try it today and then try it in 3 months and see if you feel better. Or if you're in a situation where, for you, Ashley, if you have an interview next week and then you have one 3 months from now, how did you feel? How would you evaluate your own performance? Because part of it, and I don't mean, did you use all the right words, but how did you feel in terms of how you showed up? And really look at it as a continuous process.
This was great, Rachel. I took so many notes along the way. I especially love the, who are your people and really identifying what it specifically is about them that you love, because then you can start developing, how you want to emulate that. So I thought that was really, really great. So thank you all so much for attending. Our next session is on Monday at 12 Eastern with Heather Willems, Draw Your Big Ideas, Owning Your Strengths. I put a link to a survey for tonight's session. And Rachel, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this intimate session that we all could really participate and join in.
Thanks, everybody. And now I just see that people were chatting. I didn't open it up.
Oh, no, I was monitoring. All good.
Okay.
It was limited. We were all good.
Well, thanks, everybody. I wish you continued success and hope everyone stays healthy and well.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.